viral fame. And if you don't want your face on this camera, you can turn off your video at this time. And other than that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Stephanie Sunata. Welcome to Personal Documentary. Let's give her a warm personal doc welcome. Woo! Okay, I'll do this. Action. Okay, hit it.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Yeah, love all of the conversations that we've had here in Colorado. And thanks for inviting me into this space. And it's great to, meet some fellow filmmakers and everything. So a little bit about my background is I started in journalism. So I was always growing up really interested in storytelling, did all the writing classes I could, creative writing, nonfiction writing. I was part of the paper. And I also had a real interest in social justice and history. And so journalism kind of fit into that, trying to find out truths, trying to, see areas that I could make a positive impact. It wasn't until I graduated grad school, actually, that I thought about actually getting into, filmmaking. And I thought, the natural next step instead of just print journalism would be to, see documentaries in the early 2000s that they were, starting to trend upwards. So I thought that was really interesting. And that started to really kind of shake what I thought as a journalist. In journalism school, you're taught to be, the objective observer, and you're just there to record history. And you're an outside person, direct cinema, you fly on the wall kind of thing. But I lived in Chicago and interned at Cartemplin Films, which some of you may be familiar with Hoop Dreams, Minding the Gap, a lot of those. And they really, Gordon Quinn was kind of my mentor and really kind of shook that out of me. Like, no, they were doing things and saying things from like Hoop Dreams, paying for the family's electric bill. I was like, as a journalist, I would have never thought of that, but it really forced me to rethink what and the power dynamics of documentary and nonfiction filmmaking. I think we've all heard the, old homage that, history is written by the victors. And I had kind of understood that, but didn't really live it until I started thinking about that. And then as my career, I've been in the industry for about 11 years now. As my career started to evolve, I've definitely gone away from that objective observer and started to really appreciate personal documentaries. I don't know if you've heard of Steve James's, he has a personal documentary called Stevie where he does insert himself into that. It's an early 2000s film, really interesting ethics involved in that as well. So I would highly recommend that. But, after seeing that one, I was like, oh, there's whole other stories that can be told, and history does not have to be recorded by the objective observers and the victors. Like, we don't have to be, participants in stories. We can actually start writing and telling our own stories. And I think that's where personal documentaries have such a power. And we're starting to see that there is a real need for that in this way. So I think that's important to have personal documentaries and even personal journalistic pieces as part of the canon and storytelling and in our society. We've seen the democratization of camera equipment. When documentaries first started, film was expensive. Getting training to actually know how to use the camera and develop your own film was expensive and took a lot of specialized training. But now that anybody can have, a camera in their pocket, I think is starting to see that there's a really powerful movement to do some really cool independent work. And I think that's a great thing for the industry and for society and for a lot of these conversations that are really important to help progress positive social change. So that's kind of my background on where I come from on a philosophical approach. as I mentioned, I have worked for Cartemquin Films. I've also worked for Lady and Bird Films, who just released the documentary Subject, which is kind of the documentary about documentaries and what it means to be a participant in documentary films and the ethics around that. And I'm mostly a freelance impact and outreach producer. So really thinking about how to get films out and use them as engagement tools to help the directors and producers accomplish the goals that they want, not just getting the film seen, but being part of movements that are already existing. And films are really powerful ways to get people up and involved in that. So I'm definitely open. I can drop my email and everything if anybody has questions on distro, festivals, the impact side after the film is finished kind of thing. I'm always happy to talk about that because it's an ever-changing area, and definitely want to support truly independent projects as well. Um, but in that regard, I'm also making my first feature-length directorial debut, which I've been working on since journalism school, actually. I am a descendant of Japanese and Chinese Americans. And if anyone's familiar with the Japanese internment in World War II, it was a huge injustice perpetrated by the US government to imprison the Japanese population on the West Coast, basically imprisoning them without due process. Um, Luckily, most of my family avoided that because we settled in Colorado, and we avoided the camps. But my grandfather was drafted, and I always remembered him talking about just kind of the irony of him first trying to enlist after Pearl Harbor and being turned away because he was classified as an enemy alien. And then actually a few months later being drafted, he's like, well, I wanted to do that. And you guys told me no, and having to serve in the war, with those kind of conflicted feelings. And I was always interested in that, again, being very interested in history, thinking that it was a historical part of something in the past in our country that we were just going to get over. But again, as I grew as a person and started learning more about how, power likes to stay in power, um, realizing that it's not just a historical story, it's not just something that happened in the past. A lot of these things carry really, really deep rooted traumas. And so I met somebody in Chicago who had also gone through a similar thing, and he reminded me so much of my grandfather. His name is Enoch Kanaya. He is 99 years old. He's still kicking. He's still driving, which is scary, but I'm talking with his daughters on trying to get him off the road. But he just had a really, really interesting story. And I asked him if he would be part of this graduate school, just short piece. And he said yes. And it evolved from there. I was like, there's a bigger story here than just a print piece for the tiny little school publication that nobody's going to read. And so I started on that journey talking to him with his daughters and the multi-generational trauma that was inflicted through that, as well as them trying to find their own identities as Japanese Americans and not being, I think it's similar to the Holocaust, not only being tied to the trauma. They're more than just the Holocaust. Their experience is more than just the internment camps. So trying to have all of that. So that is the project I'm currently working on. So personally not in it, even though I'm talking with my editor and everything, because everyone does ask me, well, are you in it? You should be in it. You should be the narrator in it. So trying to kind of navigate those ways on how I'm in it without being in front of the camera, I guess. Which is might be again why Stevie hit so close to home for me. Steve James, like, I am a documentary filmmaker. I don't go in front of the camera, but Gordon actually, and the Cartemquin folks were like, you have to be, this is that story. So those are the kind of things that I'm struggling with now. So that's just kind of my background and thoughts about, personal documentaries. And really, I have a lot of personal documentaries that I could recommend. I'm sure a lot of you have seen them, but you know, it's just, I think, so important for people to tell their own stories and to put the record straight on, like, these are what our complete experiences, not just surface level, and everything like that. So I'm sure a lot of you have also run into a lot of similar challenges. So when I've been working, like I said, on this Japanese internment documentary for about those 10 years since I got out of grad school, and have gone through the ringer of going through the funding and the pitching processes, and everything like that. And a really common trend that I was seeing is people were like, well, how is this different from any other documentary about the Japanese internment? And that just really struck a huge chord with me, because I was like, you're putting this man and our experience and lumping it, saying all Japanese internment experiences are the same. And therefore, if one documentary has already been made about it, we have enough of them. And at one person, I did press them to ask. I was like, okay, well, which film do you think this sounds like? And they didn't have an immediate answer. And they emailed me back a few days later and just like had this list. And I think they just Googled Japanese and World War II, because they sent me a documentary about Japanese kamikaze pilots. Totally different country, totally different experience. And it just really frustrated me. And I actually left and I was like, you know what? Fine. I guess this film doesn't need to be made, because everyone's telling, not everyone, but lots of people were telling me it's a similar story. Just because it's about a similar incident or it's about a similar theme, that's it. And recently meeting, folks like Dewi and Rebecca, seeing your films and how brave you were to put those out there, I think, and other folks along this journey, I was like, well, no, this shit needs to get made, even if it is similar, even if it is the same story. Like, it's really, really important to have your stories and your perspective out there as artists, as filmmakers, and not just as people. Um, so that's kind of the long and short of what I've been doing and thinking about for kind of the last 10 years. So I don't know, I'm pretty informal, didn't really have a lot of structure for this, but more wanted to kind of hear what everybody else's thoughts were, and um, answer any questions, and also, be able to hear what you're working on, and maybe also commiserate on some of the struggles that we faced.
Stephanie, that was beautiful. Thank you. I think what we'll do, if people have questions, you can also stick them into the chat. So that way, if we don't get to all of them, oh, my dog. If we don't get to all of them, then we can maybe follow up. And then if people, I see 2 hands up. So I see Bruce and Dayway, and then Peter. So we'll go through. I'm looking the way my screen is. So I'll go Bruce, then Dayway, then Peter, then Suzanne. Oh, everybody got their hand up. Very exciting. Put it in the chat. Okay. So let's go first, Bruce.
First of all, thank you for being here. It's a powerful story, and unfortunately, my hometown or home state had an internment camp, which is really, really sad. And every story is unique. So please tell your story, even though it's about that time. That individual story needs to be told. It makes me think of my hometown here in Mesa. The dividing line was Main Street, and if you live north or south of it, depending on you had to go to internment camp or not. And so that's something that you don't really hear about. So please tell your story. And those other people who said that there's enough being told is just full of crap. Every story is so unique, and it's just, and I always talk about that here in my hometown. I'm a historian and stuff. It's like, you need to tell those stories, and from your perspective. It really matters. And then here in Arizona, we never talk about the Chinese and the railroad. I go, you guys never talk about that. Like, what it didn't build itself, So, and those are always stories that we need to hear from folks like you. So please continue that. My quick question is about impact producer. When is a good time to bring impact producer on to a project? Is it early on? I'm working on a project now that I feel the bigger picture is violence against Black women. So when would you recommend I start talking to someone?
Yeah, and I think Dakota, it looks like they have the same question, so I'll answer this now. One anecdote about the Chinese rail workers as well. I went to I don't know why, but we were in Oklahoma City and we didn't have anything to do for that afternoon after a conference, so we went to the National Cowboy and Western Museum. And this was in the like pre-pandemic, so mid 2000 or teen 2000s. And I think they were trying to do DEI training, but so they had this like artwork exhibition of, BIPOC and, historically underrepresented artists. One of them was the Chinese rail workers artist, and it was just pretty bland. But it was the curator's caption on it that like struck me. The curator had written, usually museum curators write the captions and everything. It's like, this is, depicting the Chinese rail workers who really helped, the infrastructure of the United States in the 1800s. And they were just highly used because they were more economical and they were used to working in these harsh conditions. And I was like, more economical as in like indentured servitude, like you were able to, it was just like a very whitewashed way of saying
Wow.
that they were paying them crap and treating them like that. So sorry, I just had to throw that out there. You're totally right about that. To your question though, impact producing, I think usually I like to come on to a project usually when you're in about your fine cut stage. That is usually helpful for me because I just kind of know that what the story is pretty much. You're just putting kind of the final touches on it. But we can start really planning out exactly what you want to do. But I've also started projects where they were like really, really early, like they were still in assembly cut or they were still producing, they were still shooting. And, they were just like, this is what we want the film to be. I've started that. And I've also started the film is finished and we want to hit the ground running. So it really just kind of depends on your goals and your needs of the film. That impact producers, we can come in at pretty much any time. But what's really helpful is having really clear ideas what you want to do for the film. And or being open to having those discussions. I've definitely been able to sit down with directors and they don't quite know, but they're able to sit down with it and talk. It's really hard. I definitely have turned down jobs for some folks who are just like, I just want to get it out there. I was like, okay, well, then I don't think we're a right fit because mine is more of, okay, we are actually talking about more grassroots engagement, trying to really do, if all you want to do is do the festivals and, and then move on to your next project, which is a completely legitimate thing. I know these things take years off your life. That's not that's not really what the types of projects that I specialize in. So kind of long and short of it too, Bruce, is whatever you need. It's more of, are we a good fit, with your impact producer to get the goals that you want of the film.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
I will just put in an anecdote as well. Just a lot of folks also, I know most of our job as filmmakers is fundraising. And so having to fundraise for a final round, like you already had to fundraise for, your color and your sound mix, and you thought you were done. Impact producing does take a while. And it does take a decent sized budget. So just kind of put that in the back of your mind. If you're raising funds for finishing, maybe put a few thousand extra to at least kickstart that part of it, because festivals take a lot of money, getting press releases out, social media, there's a lot of things that do take some time. So I would earmark, if you are looking at an impact campaign type film, earmark, some to at least hold you over for the first month or two.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. So we have like 10 minutes left with you, Stephanie. So I just want to be mindful of that for our time, because I see Susanna had a question in the chat and I feel like you talked a little bit about that, but there is a question there. And then I wanted to make sure that Dewi, did you want to go? Did you have your hand up? I see.
Yeah, I'll go real quick, and this is a much bigger conversation, so just whatever you can dip into quickly here. But Stephanie, we were emailing back and forth after my screening last week and about the idea of minimizing harm and how that's a trend that you're seeing in the indie space, at least. And that's what Subject was all about, is coming in with a lot of respect for the people who you're showing on screen and the way you are telling stories. So this isn't perfectly formed in my head, but I felt like this is an important topic for our group. From the impact side, and also from your own experiences in making your film, how are you dealing with the moments where your truth or the person's truth of the film, the truth of the film that you're helping to support out in the world might come up against something else? For example, I'm like, I still haven't figured out how to tell my mom that this film is out, my adoptive mom, right? Because I'm afraid she's going to feel villainized, even though this is my story to tell and my truth to share. So without making it too personal or too, specific to my film, can you talk a little bit about that balance of minimizing harm? I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I'm really happy to talk with you offline. And I don't think anybody has an answer, but I think communication, from what I've seen, especially working with Subject, communication is just key. There are so many different stories and there's so many different viewpoints, and we're just intertwined. We're an intertwined species. We're all connected. I'm kind of running into that in mine as well, because two of Enoch's daughters are very open to talking. One of them is not. And I have reached out to her, and I definitely want to give her the chance to talk about it. But even if she doesn't want to be in the film, this is her family's film. Her neighbors are going to know that this is her family. This is her, experience. And I think just keeping those lines of communication open and talking about where you are is just really, really important, because I think each situation is different. So you and your adoptive mother have a different situation than maybe, the subject directors and our, co-producers and the people. But what we always on that particular project, and what I've tried to adopt on my own personal projects, is just keeping the open lines of communication. Like, this is where I'm thinking. And I think standing to your own truth and saying that this is my story. You are a part of it, and by extension, it is partly your story, but this is what I have to get out into the world, and this is what I have to say. But I think as long as it's not re-traumatizing to you or others, saying the communication line is open for me. Another thing we used on Subject is a participant advocate. And so she was a licensed mental health professional. I'm so sorry, I can't remember if she was a psychologist or psychiatrist. But not only did she help on the actual filming, but she was also there for the distribution. She checked in with everybody, like, Tribeca is our world premiere. How are you all feeling about this? How is everybody feeling about the, press requests that are coming in from these publications and everything? And I could definitely connect you. One of our producers on Subject was Margie Ratliff. She was a participant in the documentary series The Staircase about the death of her mother. Really, really traumatizing incident. And she just created a nonprofit organization called the DPEA, so the Documentary Participant Empowerment Alliance. And I can definitely put you in touch with her, because what she is doing is really, really exciting, in that she comes from the filmmaking side as well as being a participant in multiple documentary films, because she was also in Subject now. In that, trying to really make these resources more accessible. So instead of just these pockets of individuals who are ethically minded doing these things on their own, she's really trying to centralize these resources and say, hey, let's this is how these conversations went with my father, because her and her father now have a kind of tumultuous relationship, from her participating in Subject and her speaking out against being a part of Staircase, because it was tough on her life, even though it helped her father's court case. And he really wanted the family to be part of this documentary because it would have helped his court case. So yeah, I would definitely say let's start there. And by all means, like email me or we can meet up and I can connect you with Margie. In that, having communication and just being open about everything, I think is just where we start.
Okay, that was wonderful. Uh-oh, we're running out of time. Peter, you're muted.
Gosh, what I was saying was so eloquent. Wow. Stephanie, what you were saying in the beginning, your trepidation around, is this story important? Is it important for me? Is it important for the world? To echo Bruce's affirmation, yes, 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 yes. And why I say that is not only as a personal documentary filmmaker, I've been involved with Korimatsu and know the history and been involved with a play that was all about Jean Hirbashi here. Anyway, another person who went through the legal process. There, I put a couple of links here for people to understand the trauma of the Japanese internment, because it echoes, it's resounding through our society in the ways that people think about people who don't look like me. And so I think it's so important to keep telling those stories, that I've actually done a cross-country trip looking specifically at Chinese American experiences and drove the railroad bed of the Continental Railway through Utah and Nevada to tell some of the stories. So please, please, please keep going. If you need any support from our group, from me, go, go, go. It's really important.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Okay, with our last 2 minutes, because I see Susanna, you put your question in the chat, and I don't know if you wanted to say it, or what would you like?
Sure, I'll just, yeah, so I'm just curious to know, you might have said this, but I missed it possibly. What stage in the filmmaking are you at, and what are your biggest challenges? And are you using your impact campaign skills now at the stage you're in, maybe to, support your process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm in probably in the middle of production. So I have a lot of filming done with Enoch, but the story kind of evolved, especially post-pandemic, with anti-Asian American hate being heightened in this country. And it's actually sparked some changes in the daughters as well. And so the daughters are definitely, and the younger generations are definitely a bigger part of the story. In that regard, yes, using impact work, the grassroots and community building can happen at any stage. So I bet a lot of you already have connections with organizations or groups that are really important to the stories that you're telling and to your own experiences. And that can happen, I think, at any stage in the filmmaking process and what I'm doing now. So working with the JASC out in Chicago, which is as well as the American Legion, which is Enoch is a part of, because he's still very involved. So those are all things that, I've been doing. Also, to answer some of your questions, I'll try to get through this really quickly. I'll send an email out to Rebecca, and I put my email in the chat as well. So if anyone has questions, I have some impact materials that I gather. There's not as many grants as we would like, but over the last 10 years, there's been more impact grants. So I can put together that list of the ones that I know of, and, disseminate it that way. Cause I think there are some great things in that regard.
Listen, it's 11 a.m. We have to end because of the time. So even though I believe that is upholding the tenets of white supremacy, but I am going to go ahead and say we are ending at 11. So I want to thank you so much. And for people who have to hop off immediately, please do so. We're not going to say anything too exciting right now, but so if you have to go, please leave. But I wanted to thank everyone this is my first time facilitating the group, and just trying to get it going on or whatever. So thank you so much for being patient with me.